Back in 2013, I read an article on Kotaku about a video game tournament happening in Seattle where the winners had walked away with over $1 million in prize money. It had been watched by tens of thousands of people and even had a huge live audience cheering the teams on while they fought for glory. The game was Dota 2 and the tournament was the International 3. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life. I'd watched the video that was embedded in the article of the closing stages of the final match, and the energy and complexity utterly blew my mind. I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. The commentators were screaming, the crowd was going crazy, stuff was exploding all over the screen, and I could hardly understand what was happening or what the teams were even trying to do. For some reason, I was intrigued. I wanted to understand what the point of the game was, how it worked, and why it was considered such a big deal for these two teams to be duking it out over such a massive amount of money. I decided to do a bit of research, watch a few videos about how the game worked, and eventually dive into a game. This is my love letter to the world of Dota 2, to the 3,000 hours that I've spent playing it since that first day, and how it's possible to absolutely love and utterly despise a video game all at the same time. Let's start where everyone does, with what that first game of Dota is actually like. For those of you who don't know how it works, it's actually a pretty simple game. 2 teams of 5 pick characters to play as and then work together to destroy the opposite team's base by leveling up your character and killing opponents. Where things get dicey is that while the premise of the game is pretty simple, virtually every element of the game that sits on top of that is extremely complicated. In fact, it's now at the point where I'm not actually sure how someone new is supposed to learn how to play Dota 2 properly. In order to get stronger in the game and eventually reach the point where you can destroy the enemy base, you need to get experience in order to level up and improve your skills, and get gold in order to buy items which either do their own thing or improve your stats. The most obvious way to do this is just from killing your opponents, which rewards both resources. But actually the primary way it's done is through killing your enemy's troops which fight across the map. This means that the game has a natural flow of being in the lane, killing enemy creep to get stronger, and then coming together to fight as a team before going off to level up again. The issue is that this natural flow isn't always clear cut and relies entirely on the player to know how much they should be farming levels and when they should be fighting. In the world of online gaming where proper communication essentially doesn't exist, it becomes almost impossible to coordinate properly with your teammates or even form a basic strategy about who should be doing what and when. That concept of what you should be doing at any given time gets even more complicated when you factor in just how many variables there are. There is 121 different heroes to pick from at the start of the game, all of which fulfill different and overlapping roles within a team. Some support stronger heroes by stunning enemies or healing allies. Some have huge moves that are meant to be used in the heat of a 5v5 battle. Some are incredibly weak at the start of the game, but grow to be incredibly strong by the end. It's just a ludicrous amount to learn when you factor in that every hero has its own strengths and weaknesses, which completely depend on what configuration of 5 heroes you have from the available pool. To give you a really simple example, one of my favourite heroes is a character called Tidehunter, who's basically a giant fish man. His key move is a big ultimate attack called Ravage, which is a big explosion of tentacles that stuns all your opponents and lets your allies tear into them unopposed. It's so satisfying to hit 5 people with it, but when exactly you do this completely depends on who you're playing against. If you're playing against Enigma, who similarly has a huge ultimate move called Black Hole, you probably want to hold on to Ravage, and instead of trying to land a big 5-man attack to start the fight, you use it when Enigma uses Black Hole to interrupt that and turn the battle around. But let's say you're playing against Silencer, a hero who has a move that can disable all of your moves from any range. You probably want to hit him first so your team can take him out before the silence ever goes off. That's a hell of a lot of nuance behind just one single move on one single hero, and there's absolutely no way to learn all of this in-game quickly. One of the few ways you can learn all of the individual matchups is by immersing yourself in YouTube tutorials and online guides, which is exactly what I had to do when I was starting out. Learning to play Dota was literally like studying for a degree, finding resources and taking notes from videos, having to put in time practicing against bots or learning individual move stats. It's just an astounding barrier for entry that genuinely means the difference between being able to enjoy a game and being utterly lost. Nowadays you've got a million different personalities making guides on how to play the game, and even in-game guides that are made by the community themselves, but back in those early days there was only really a few places to go. There was Dota Fire, which had written guides which you could copy across into the client, and Purge, the spiritual father of many a Dota player. His videos were so important to me actually being able to understand the game that there's no way I'd have ever carried on playing without him. It's great that he's now become a big part of the Dota community and he's reaping the rewards for all of his hard work.
Thanks, Purge. You're the best. Well done.
It's just kind of astounding that the game doesn't have a more comprehensive tutorial. Valve really owes a massive debt to the creators who take the time to dedicate themselves to educating people about the game. Of course, if you're not up for approaching the game so academically, you can always just pick it up naturally by diving into game after game and learning on the fly. And that brings me on to another huge barrier to getting into Dota 2. This is not a game that respects your time or schedules. Now, estimates vary about how long the average game is, but in my experience, I would say that if you don't have at least an hour available, you should not be loading up a game of Dota. That's right, you didn't hear me wrong. Games of Dota can go on for absolutely forever if teams find themselves in a stalemate and neither can break the deadlock. I think my longest game on record is about 2 hours long, which I also lost, so imagine how good I felt about that time investment. It's just so different to the way most online games work. Other player versus player games like Call of Duty or Hearthstone are based around a really short but enjoyable game loop. You load into a game, blast away, and then hop straight onto another game straight away after. Dota's just so far removed from that. It's perfectly normal to have a game where nothing really happens for the first 15 minutes, or where you get completely stomped at the start and you have to spend 40 minutes in a brutal race to even catch up. What I think really pushes this over the edge for most people is that while the games can be really long, there's absolutely no way to surrender if you feel like you can't win. Dropping out of a game halfway through carries some really severe penalties, as you're essentially ruining the game for your other teammates who now have to carry on at a massive disadvantage. There's frankly no worse feeling in the world than locking yourself into a hero that you're not completely comfortable with and quickly realising that you're out of your depth and can't really do anything. You can't quit because you'll be penalised, you can't surrender, and all the while your teammates are probably tearing you a new ass for stepping outside of your comfort zone. Special mention has to be given to the unique brand of toxicity that flows through the veins of most Dota players.
Shut the fuck up, coach!
I have never seen such ferocious anger as in this game when a teammate makes a mistake or someone does something wrong. Insults the likes of which can never be repeated are thrown around like confetti at a wedding, and it's completely normal to have a teammate screaming down the mic at you and have absolutely no idea what they're talking about.
Are you kidding me?
Who's fucking bottom, Omni? What the fuck?
Why have you so bounty to from your carry?
Me as fuck, you stupid fuck! Shut the fuck up, dude.
Fuck you, mother. Fuck you. Fuck you.
Are you fucking kidding me? Shut the fuck up. It's kind of fucking strange that you guys fucking bitching about me fucking jungling and then you not picking a hero that scales.
What makes matters worse is that the quality of your games is utterly dependent on your behaviour in the game. At the end of a match, players can report or commend you, and if you get enough reports, your behaviour score gets tanked and you'll be playing with trolls and quitters for the rest of your life. In principle, it's actually a pretty good system, but it's still open to some savage abuse. For example, if you're playing on your own and a pre-made group of 3 or 4 players take against you, even for something as simple as taking some gold they felt entitled to or not being exactly where they wanted you in a fight, you're probably netting 4 reports all at once. It means even when stuff is hitting the fan and someone is ruining your game, you've still got to be nice, because at the end of the day, if you choose someone out, all they're going to do is report you, and the cost of being down with the trolls in low priority is just not worth it.
You're a stupid piece of shit and you're gonna get fucking reported and you're gonna keep losing.
It's utterly unique in how much of a lion's den it is to step into the world of Dota 2. I'm not sure if it's the massive time investment or just that the game demands a level of intensity that gets people's blood pumping, but I've never witnessed such a lack of humanity centered purely on an online game. I've genuinely seen friends shouting at one another and legitimate emotions boiling over as if something truly serious was at stake. Altogether, the insane time it asks of you, the education it demands to even be able to understand it, and the brutal treatment of those who don't, make for a game which I quite honestly believe is impossible to get into. You'd have to be utterly insane to try and jump these 3 hurdles in 2021, when there are just so many other games out there that offer much richer rewards and ask so much less of you. As the game is completely free, there's nothing to work towards. No skins to be grinded for or characters to unlock. It's just games of Dota, endlessly, with no progression whatsoever. And yet, I still play the game, and I still love playing it. I love reading about new strategies that people have discovered. I love looking back at the end of a brutal match and working out what we could have done differently. That's the dual nature of Dota 2. It's like a mountain peak that you struggle and battle to reach the summit of. It's not always enjoyable. You wouldn't even recommend that someone else does it. But it can be supremely satisfying in a way that nothing else really compares to. That ridiculous level of complexity means that there's a depth to the gameplay that's quite literally impossible to find in any other game in any genre. On top of the 121 heroes, who all have 4 or more distinct skills to level, and talents which are just how these skills work, there are 150 purchasable items and 50 neutral items that have to be found out on the map rather than bought. It means that the level of scope for experimenting with builds and team composition is almost never ending. It's essentially impossible to ever get bored of Dota. One of my favourite heroes at the moment is Winter Wyvern, who's traditionally played as a support who sits at the back of a fight, healing teammates and disabling enemies with a big ultimate move. I've been playing Wyvern like this for years, always thinking of her as a super squishy healer who lets the big boys dance while she sits at the side. Recently though, I've discovered a completely different way to play her. Instead of sitting in lane supporting a carry, you go to the mid lane and turn her into a sort of long-range magical attack damage monster. I'd never even thought to do this until I saw it in a pro game, and it's just the funniest thing to do in the world. Because of her abilities, she can fly over terrain and gets an insane attack range. With the right combo of items, you can blast people from miles away while travelling around at warp speed, basically impossible to catch. It's just such a fun, different way to play a hero that I thought I knew inside out. It just shows that you can play this game for thousands of hours and never come close to playing everything, seeing everything, or mastering everything that the game has to offer. Even if somehow you did manage to reach the pinnacle and feel like you completely understood the game, it never stands still. The game gets around 1 or 2 major patches a year which mix up the balancing, adding or removing gameplay elements, and really can quite dramatically change how the game feels. Back when I first picked up the game, it was generally a lot slower paced, with a lot of focus being put on protecting your late game heroes while they farmed up and got strong. Nowadays it's more about brawling throughout the game with lots of low cooldown abilities going off and fighting being really heavily rewarded. In fact, the meta that governs the game has always been in a state of complete flux, with some heroes having their time in the sun and others falling by the wayside. My most played hero of all time is a late game hero called Terrorblade, who uses copies of himself to get extra XP and gold from around the map, eventually turns into a hulking demon that blasts people from range and can swap HP with opponents. I find him extremely fun to play, but it's funny how through different patches and metas, I've had to learn to play him in all sorts of different styles for him to be viable. He's been a jungler, hiding away and using his copies to get an early advantage. I've played him in the mid lane back when he used to have an extremely strong slow, and I've played him as a global rat hero, which is the name for heroes that teleport all over the map, threatening towers and forcing your opponents to chase him around. Sadly, I don't think he's all that viable anymore, but it's just crazy to think that I've had all these different experiences from just playing the same hero on the same map over the course of a handful of years. Despite all that praise though, I really feel like the last few patches haven't been for me. While the ever-changing landscape is part of the appeal, I think the game has added too much recently. There's just so much to keep track of now, with what feels like more being added every single patch rather than refinement of what they already had. The biggest offender for me is the neutral items. They're items that jungle creep drop when you kill them at set times, but it's completely random which ones you get. Sometimes it's something that complements you perfectly, other times they just feel sort of useless. It's just an element of randomness that I don't really like in the game. It feels like it saps away some of the strategy, and not really for a particularly big payoff either, as a lot of them have been nerfed quite heavily for the sake of balance. The same can be said for the Aghanim Scepter system, which was one of the best elements in the game, but has unfortunately sort of been overcomplicated as well. Basically, the Aghanim Scepter is an item which every hero can buy, which usually adds a new ability or changes one of theirs in a pretty major way. For some heroes like Zeus, it adds a new ability, in his case a Nimbus Cloud which can be cast anywhere on the map and blasts enemies with bolts of lightning. For other heroes like Templar Assassin, it modifies her traps and allows her to teleport to them, which really changes her playstyle and what builds you can go for. The issue is that a few patches ago they added the Aghanim Shard item, which is essentially like another mini scepter, but costs less gold. Again, it either adds or changes an ability, but just not in as major way as the scepter, or at least that's what it's supposed to do. Thanks to some weird balancing choices, some of the shards are arguably better than the scepter upgrades. Legion Commander in particular stands out. Her shard can make her heal not only debuff negative effects, but it also gives a short burst of spell immunity, which turns it into an incredible save. Her scepter, on the other hand, just extends the duration of her duel, which is pretty pointless when the aim is to win as many duels as possible. The point is really that it's just a whole level of complexity which I don't really think adds a huge amount to the best part of the game, which is making a team that fits nicely together and coming up with strategies in the game to make it all work. It means even if you stopped playing Dota 2 a few years ago, there's an absolutely astronomical barrier to getting back into the game, simply from just not being up to date with the huge amount of things that have been added. I really wish they'd tone it back down a bit and go back to some of the elegance that a simpler game can have. Luckily, a side effect of all this absurd complexity is that the scope for messing around and having fun is absolutely huge. I think it's something that's actually really badly missing from a lot of online games in the HD era. There's such a massive focus on skill level and esports style gaming in general that we've really lost sight of just how much fun it is to mess around in a game. The only other online game that I've ever really gotten into was Halo 3, and I think that's because it's another game that really got how much fun it is to just not play the game seriously. There were just so many modes that were off the wall and let you focus on something else other than climbing the ranked ladder. Modes like Rocket Race, where teams shot about the map on invincible dune buggies firing rockets at each other, or Infection, where zombified players would have to kill and convert humans to their team, were so much more fun than the traditional deathmatch modes. Although, that being said, the core game was so sandbox in its design that you could even have fun within the confines of a normal match. Modes like Snipers Only or Swords Only, they were born out of a community just having fun making crazy game modes that force you to play in a different way. Now, I'm not saying that Dota and Halo are the only online games that embrace variety, but they're the ones that have sucked me into at this level. Because of the ridiculous scope for experimentation, the margin for messing around in Dota is just ridiculous, and it makes for a game that, yes, you can take incredibly seriously, but you can also just have fun with. Ridiculous strategies that should never work turn into hilarious battles to not just win the game, but even be able to pull them off. My personal favourite is the all fish team, where you've got to make a team out of characters who are sea people, or make a team where everyone's riding a horse. It's just stupid, but damn if it isn't the part of online gaming that I love. It might seem unlikely, thanks to all the rage and rank obsession from the player base, but the game itself is actually kinda geared towards this. There are a lot of different game modes which can be really fun. There are actually a lot of game modes outside of the standard 5v5 base destruction of all pick. There's all random deathmatch, which is an absolutely hilarious mess where every time you die, you respawn as a different hero. You've got a set amount of respawns, and it's just a bonkers brawl from start to finish. One mode which people really love is ability draft, that essentially has you selecting individual abilities to create a Frankenstein's monster of a hero. It's totally broken, with some of the combinations just being impossible to stop, but it's actually a pretty great way to learn a lot of the abilities and synergies, and it's just so damn funny to see a tiny rock man charging across the map at you. And that's not to say anything of the special events, which usually bring something completely different to the table, usually with a PvE flavour to them. Dietide is the most famous one, mainly because players were so desperate for it to come back that they started spamming the car manufacturer Volvo, saying please give us Dietide. It's just a nice way to break up the intensity of normal matches, and it helps that a lot of these other modes are just hilarious to be on Discord with your friends while all of the crazy nonsense is breaking out. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the game is at its best when you're as far away from ranked play as possible, taking the game far less seriously than most players do. I say this because my least favourite period of playing the game was around 2016 or 2017, when I was taking the game incredibly seriously and really trying to get my rank up. It might sound ridiculous to say, but I think the game genuinely made me depressed. Such was my obsession and thirst to get my rank up to what I believed it should be. I spent hours every day reading about the game, trying to find an edge and improve my knowledge. At night after work, I was playing the game for 3 or 4 hours every single day, grinding ranked games with my very best heroes, meticulously practiced, selected from hours of studying win rates in my bracket and practicing in unranked. Wins were short-lived elation, plus 25 MMR on my rank, and then an almost immediate click onto the next game. Losses, however, losses were agony. I could easily just say how absurd it was to be that upset with a loss in a video game, but you've really got to think about the whole picture. The amount of time I was putting into the game inside and outside of it. The amount of emotion and concentration that you'd expend, only to lose in the final few moments of a game when you feel like you've done everything you can to win. I can't explain the levels of frustration it brings up, and yet at the same time it just strengthens your resolve to be better than your last loss. It's a sort of vicious, time-consuming circle that can really suck you in. That being said, that obsession can quickly get to the point where you become completely toxic, blaming your teammates and getting trapped in a spiral of losses where you just become desperate to turn it around, constantly thinking about how long it took you to get that 500 MMR and how quickly you've just lost it thanks to bad matchmaking or trolls that throw games on purpose. The distinction between what's a troll and what's just a player making an honest mistake gets completely blurred. And I definitely lost sight of it myself and probably became just as unpleasant as these toxic players I spoke about earlier. It's really quite shocking what a video game and the desire to win can do to you. I look back on this period of my life as one that was genuinely pretty miserable, trapped in a Stockholm Syndrome relationship with a game that I loved but was driving me insane. When I eventually managed to kick the obsession, I uninstalled the game and didn't touch it for almost 2 years. A complete cold turkey separation to cure the addiction. It's strange though, if it were any other game, that would likely have been the end of it. I'd stopped enjoying playing it, so I shouldn't have ever gone back, right? Well, Dota 2 isn't exactly like other games. There is an absolutely huge part of it that lives outside of the game. A complete alternative reality where you don't experience Dota as a player, but as a sport. I'm of course talking about the absolutely massive Dota 2 pro scene, which was of course my first exposure to the game back in that dusty old Kotaku article. Maybe it's just because I'm 30 years old, but the idea that there could be a full professional competition with paid players, sponsors, training camps and high profile transfers just seems mind-blowing. But here it is. It very much exists and I absolutely love it. It must sound really weird, but it's the professional scene that's kept me in touch with Dota over the years while I was purposefully not playing it. It's just genuinely that engaging as a spectator sport that it's possible to keep track of patches and spend hours watching games in the client, all without actually playing a second yourself. The biggest event of the year is of course Valve's mega tournament, the International. It's contested by the best teams from all over the world and is watched by hundreds of thousands of people. What usually grabs the headlines is the absolutely astronomically large prize pool that's crowdfunded from the viewers themselves. This year I think it sits at around $40 million, which you can be sure will hit the front pages of Sky and the BBC when the winner finally snags it. But it's not just the scale and enormity of it. The tournament itself is a genuine thrill to watch, easily as exciting as any real sporting tournament I've ever been to. For starters, the quality of the Dota that the teams play is like something from another world. Having played the game for almost 10 years and considering myself somewhat good at it, the stuff that the professional players do is just insane. They come up with ways of playing the game that you'd never even think of during your time in the trenches with us normies. The reaction times and decision making is at a superhuman level. It's beyond impressive to watch the coordination and synergies playing out across the map like a well-oiled machine. And that's not to say anything about the fact that it all takes place in person in a huge stadium with a massive crowd creating a pressure cooker environment, and the games being played in series that can last as long as 4 hours. I mean, for most people, playing a video game is meant to be a relaxing experience, and these guys are basically in the most intense atmosphere I can possibly imagine. The whole experience of watching the tournament is also just so well put together. The production value and effort that the organisers put into humanising the teams sucks you so deep into their stories, and even if you aren't really that clued up about what's happening in the game, there's commentary and analysis that helps piece it all together. What makes the professional scene truly addicting though, is that it's so much more than just the game being played at its ultimate skill level. There's an astounding level of human drama, the likes of which puts any other sport to shame. While tons of dramatic things have happened over the years, the absolute peak was the breakup of a team called OG. In short, it was a really successful team led by 2 best friends, No Tail and Fly, who played together since they were teenagers. Fly ended up leaving just before the International in order to switch to a big American organisation, as he thought it would give him a better chance of winning the grand prize, which OG had never been able to do. It was essentially a big stab in the back to No Tail, who was left high and dry to form a new team right on the cusp of the biggest tournament of them all. It would mean that his new version of OG, made up of relatively unknown players, would have to enter the tournament as an open qualifier, playing endless preliminary rounds and qualifying tournaments just to make it to the International at all. On the main stage at the tournament, Fly, now the captain of the mighty American team EG, progressed steadily through the rounds as expected, and they looked like they might take the whole thing. That is until the losers bracket final, which is essentially like the semi-final of the whole thing, where they came up against none other than No Tail's OG. Yes, that's right, somehow these plucky underdogs managed to scrap and fight their way through all of the open qualifiers, all of the regional qualifiers, the preliminary tournament, the group stage, and now they found themselves on the main stage, face to face with their ex-teammates. It was a fairy tale matchup with everyone salivating at the potential drama, and it didn't disappoint. It was an insanely tight series with both teams looking incredibly strong, EG with their incredible understanding of the meta and OG relying on out-of-the-box originality. Eventually, No-Tail's underdogs took the win. Both teams stepped out of their booths to shake hands, only for Fly and No-Tail to look at each other with what can only be described as some sort of death stare that literally drew gasps from the audience. It was incredible, like something from a sports movie, except it was completely real and playing out in a freaking video game tournament where apparently not only millions of dollars but also the state of your soul are at stake. OG would go on to face the Chinese powerhouse team PSG LGD in the final. And yeah, that's right, that's a Chinese Dota 2 team owned by Paris Saint-Germain. LGD were the favourites, but nothing was going to stop the greatest underdog story the digital world had ever seen. The final was a best of 5 and went the whole distance, with every game lasting close to an hour, victories being snatched with inhuman split-second plays, and the mind games going to ridiculous levels. After over 5 hours, OG somehow managed to take game number 5, and No-Tail and his boys walked out looking completely stunned to the cheers of the crowd, somehow overcoming all of the odds to become the international champions. It was just the ultimate Cinderella story, the first time a team had ever won the international as a qualifier, let alone as an open entrant with a team of non-professional players put together just weeks before. It was an incredible moment that I can't believe I experienced. You genuinely wouldn't believe it if you read it somewhere. I watched it at my girlfriend's parents' house, in bed at about 5 AM, having stayed up all night, utterly transfixed to my phone. The next morning I was absolutely shattered but so buzzed. But the problem was, nobody really understood. How could I begin to explain what I'd just seen? What the game even was? What the tournament even was? How do you explain that you just watched 10 hours of the same video game being played over and over, and it was one of the most exciting things I'd ever seen? It was kind of sad in a way. It was an incredible moment, but I didn't really have anyone else to share it with. It's the downside of being so invested in Dota 2 pro games. Unless you've got someone else who's as into the game as you are, you're going to be witnessing all this on your own, with only Reddit or Twitch to make you feel like you've got some company. It's just such a niche part of such a niche game. After all, if the barrier to entry into the game itself is as ridiculous as we've discussed, how the hell are you supposed to get someone to watch 2 weeks of the highest level of the game, complete with dramatic player backstories and human drama? It's often a lonely old time watching the pro scene, enjoying victories and heartbreak all on your own, miles away from the communal ecstasy of watching a game of football live or sitting in the pub cheering on your team. Unsurprisingly, watching the crazy exploits of OG at the International 8 really reignited my bug for Dota, but this time in a much more healthy way. Maybe there was something about the way OG played, just doing meme builds and actually having fun with the game, but it inspired me to take the game a lot less seriously. Now, I play it a lot less, and I really don't ever play ranked if I do. Usually I'm loading in with friends or trying out a weird new build I've seen, rather than trying to prove anything about my skill. Safe to say I've actually started to enjoy playing the game again, which is something I never thought I'd do. In fact, I never thought a lot of things would happen between myself and that complicated mistress known as Dota 2. I never thought I'd become obsessed with it to the point of depression, borderline ruining my life to chase internet points and the acclaim of strangers. I never thought I'd see friends tear each other to pieces over mistakes and losses.
Tell someone tiny fucking sake.
I never thought I'd stay up until 6 AM watching professional players lay it all on the line for millions of dollars. And to be honest, I never thought I'd be sitting here making a video about a game that I've sunk 3,000 hours into, talking about how amazing it is while also telling stories about how awful it can be. If you're going to play it, you're going to have to watch friends come and go. You're going to be flamed, you're going to feel frustrated. You'll probably uninstall it and tell yourself that you'll never play again. But if it clicks for you, and boy did it click for me, there's nothing quite like seeing that opposing base blow up and knowing that you played your part well. So Dota 2, I absolutely hate you, But here is your love letter. Never change.
Mm-hmm.